You've been living wrong if you haven't learned this from Epictetus. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Now picture this, a quiet Roman courtyard bathed in the light of a single oil lamp. A scroll lies open on the stone bench beside you. You read the words of a man who knew that real strength never rushes to be loud. Not in anger, not in victory, not in fear. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. To understand this better, let's go back to an ancient lesson from Marcus Aurelius. You walk through the colonnades of the Forum, sunlight bouncing off the marble, voices echoing in all directions, traders, senators, soldiers. But the strongest man in Rome says nothing. His silence is not ignorance, it is intention. He speaks only when the words are necessary. That's your first lesson: control your mouth. There's a fire in you, the kind that flares up when you're disrespected, misunderstood, or ignored. But Stoicism teaches you that fire does not need to spread. You learn to hold it in place like a lamp contained. You stop speaking just to react. You start using your mouth like a scalpel, sharp, clean, and only when needed. You don't need to respond to everything. Not every comment, not every insult, not every text. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion." He didn't mean you shouldn't care. He meant you choose when to reveal your thoughts and when your silence says more than 1,000 words. Consider this: a man insults you in the street. You feel the heat rising, the words form behind your teeth, sharp and ready. But instead, you breathe. You walk past. You let his words fall into the dust behind you. To the crowd, you've lost. But to yourself, you've won the only battle that matters, the battle over your reaction. Scholars still wonder, is Stoicism just emotional suppression? Or is it something more powerful, the art of directing emotional energy to where it actually matters? When you control your speech, you begin to understand the depth of that control. You become a student of restraint, a master of verbal precision. You stop gossiping. You stop boasting. You stop explaining yourself to those who aren't ready to listen. Epictetus said, "Only the educated are free." And part of that education is learning when to shut your mouth. Not from fear, not from weakness, but from clarity, from discipline, from strength. So now ask yourself, what would happen if you used your words like a Stoic? If your replies were rare but deliberate? If your tone always remained steady no matter how chaotic the situation? Would people stop testing your boundaries or start respecting them? In this quiet power, you find something surprising: peace. A peace that doesn't need validation, applause, or even agreement. Because true strength is not about being heard. It's about being still when you could shout and choosing not to. You begin to notice something: the less you say, the more you see. When you're not planning your next sentence, you start observing everything else: facial expressions, the shifts in tone, the spaces between words. And in those silences, you gain an advantage that no impulsive outburst could ever give you awareness. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When someone provokes you, they want a reaction. They crave a sign that they've gotten under your skin. But when you remain calm, when you control your mood, suddenly they're exposed. They become the one shouting in an empty room. You, on the other hand, have turned yourself into a mirror. And mirrors don't fight back. Imagine you're back in ancient Rome. A young senator, insecure and envious, throws slander your way during an open debate. His voice rises, his words drip with sarcasm. The room waits for your rebuttal, but instead you take a breath and offer nothing. You remain composed, dignified. He's forced to wrestle with his own bitterness alone. You've just robbed him of his power by choosing not to share in his chaos. This is how a Stoic wins. Not by overpowering, but by outlasting, by holding fast when the storm comes. You've seen this in the modern world too. The person who controls their mood controls the room. The one who never flinches, never shouts, never breaks. People begin to lean in. Respect grows in that quiet presence. But it's not easy. Sometimes silence burns more than words. You want to scream, to cry, to plead your case. You want them to know what they did. And that's exactly where Stoicism tests your endurance. Scholars often debate, does detachment lead to emotional numbness? Or does it allow space for a higher form of emotional clarity? Maybe detachment doesn't mean apathy, it means discipline. It means you don't let someone else's storm shake your internal sky. You observe, you absorb, and when needed, you let it pass. Think back to your own life. The friend who ghosted you, the coworker who mocked you, the partner who left you questioning your worth. They might resurface. They might send a message as if nothing ever happened. But this time you've changed. You don't respond with anger or desperation. You don't seek closure in chaos. You give them the silence they earned. And here's the secret: your silence says everything. It says you've healed. It says you've risen. It says they no longer have access to your peace. That's not cruelty. That's sovereignty. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Every time you choose stillness over retaliation, you prove yourself. Not to them, to you. You're not weak for staying silent. You're wise. Because silence isn't an absence. It's a message, a boundary, a response that doesn't need punctuation. And once you learn that, you stop fearing their return, you stop needing to speak just to be heard. Because what's stronger than someone who can't be provoked? Someone who doesn't need to respond at all. You've held your tongue. You've remained calm. But now comes the harder part, facing the aftershocks. Silence once chosen becomes a mirror. It reflects not only your strength, but also the emptiness where noise once lived. That space can be haunting. But within it, you begin to learn a more difficult Stoic discipline, the art of self-trust. You remember something Epictetus taught: it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. What disturbs you now is not the silence of others, but the narrative you've told yourself about what their silence means. Were you not enough? Did you do something wrong, or worse? Did they always intend to hurt you? These thoughts echo in your mind, especially late at night. And in those quiet hours, you face your most dangerous opponent, your own inner voice. But this too is part of the Stoic path. You cannot control what others say or do, but you can challenge what you believe about yourself in the aftermath. Marcus Aurelius, reflecting on his struggles as emperor, wrote to himself in Meditations, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now." His reign was full of betrayal, political games, and public scrutiny. Yet he remained anchored not by praise or validation, but by principle. So here's your question. Can you sit with your silence and not fill it with self-doubt? Can you resist the temptation to chase after answers, to reopen wounds for the sake of closure that may never come? This is not easy, because people-pleasing often hides behind just wanting peace. You tell yourself you're reaching out for resolution. But beneath that is the quiet need to be liked, understood, accepted. And that need can become a chain. Stoicism asks you to break it. Picture a Roman courtyard at dusk. You walk its stone path alone, the air cooling as torches flicker against marble. There is no crowd, no applause, and yet you walk with dignity. Why? Because you know who you are. That's the real lesson. Power is not in being heard, it's in knowing you don't need to be. This is the path to inner power. Control over your mouth gives you clarity. Control over your mood gives you peace. But control over your self-worth, that's liberation. Now this might raise a dilemma. Isn't forgiveness a virtue? Shouldn't you give people second chances? Isn't detachment a wall? Philosophers still wrestle with this. Some argue that true Stoicism encourages universal compassion, that even those who hurt you deserve kindness. Others claim that boundaries are compassion for both you and them. After all, letting someone face the consequences of their actions without rescuing them is not cruelty. It's reality. So what do you do when they text you again? You pause. You feel. And maybe you don't reply. Or maybe you do, but with poise, not pleading. Not to fix things, but to honor your peace. The point isn't what you say, it's where it comes from. Not from fear, not from hope, but from strength. Seneca once reminded us, "He who is brave is free." And sometimes bravery is not in action, but in stillness. In not explaining yourself. In letting the silence speak for itself. So as you sit in that space between your truth and their noise, you begin to realize something. You're not waiting for their validation. You're not measuring your worth by their return. You're simply standing where you are. Tall, quiet, unshaken. And that is the sound of power. You wake up one morning and the message is there. Not poetic, not full of remorse. Just a flat, "Hey," as if nothing happened. As if they hadn't vanished, betrayed your trust, or shattered the bridge you once called friendship. It's tempting to believe they forgot, or changed, or didn't mean it. But the Stoic within you knows better. This moment isn't about them. It's a test for you. You reread the message. You feel the old tension return like a phantom limb. You notice your breathing shift, your mind beginning to script responses. This is where the deeper Stoic work begins, not in crafting the perfect reply, but in resisting the urge to perform, to soothe, to beg, to fix. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." What he meant wasn't soft forgiveness. It was self-restraint. It was the refusal to be pulled back into the emotional chaos that others create. You aren't required to reply just because someone demands your attention. You aren't required to abandon your peace for the sake of keeping up appearances. You stand now at a fork in the road. Do you re-engage, or do you remain still, not silent out of anger, but from clarity? There's a story that Stoic scholars reflect on about a young Roman general who returned from war to find his brother had betrayed him politically. Everyone expected vengeance. Instead, the general promoted his brother, publicly elevated him to a role of honor. When asked why, he said, "My character is mine. His shame belongs to him." That's the weight of true power, responding in ways that honor your soul, not your wounds. You breathe. This is your battlefield. Not a war of words, but of reaction. Your mouth longs to lash out or explain. Your ego wants to show it doesn't care, ironically, by crafting the perfect way to say just that. But deeper inside, you feel something else growing. Indifference. Not the cold, toxic kind, but the warm, steady kind that comes from self-respect. Scholars still debate whether indifference in Stoicism is emotional repression or divine neutrality. Some say it's a dangerous armor, that true healing lies in vulnerability. Others argue that indifference isn't a wall, but a clean window. It lets you see without illusion. You don't need them to grovel. You don't need them to explain. you see clearly. That's enough. So maybe you don't reply today. Maybe never. Or maybe you send a short sentence not to invite them back, but to place a period at the end of their sentence. Calm, clear, final. Because when you stop chasing justice from those who never offered honesty, you free yourself. That's the irony of it all. They text you hoping to pull you back into their orbit. But your silence says what their ego cannot bear, you've moved on. And now here's the most liberating part. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to expose them. You don't even need to make them feel what you felt. Because once you reclaim your peace, you stop needing retribution. Control your mouth. Don't feed the fire. Control your mood. Don't let old echoes write new scripts. Control your money. Don't invest more time, attention, or emotion into bankrupt accounts. And above all, control your mind. Don't let someone else's chaos become your internal weather. You feel the silence stretch. You don't fill it. You don't fear it. You simply stand in it like a tree rooted in a storm, unmoved. And in that moment, you realize you've already won. You pause. Still no reply sent. No explanation typed. You sit with the tension, and you don't try to dissolve it. You let it teach you something. This right here is where most people fail. They think silence is passive. They think strength comes with noise. But noise is easy. Noise is fast. Real power, it's quiet. There's a line from Epictetus. If someone speaks badly of you, do not defend yourself against the accusations, but reply, "He obviously did not know the rest of my faults, or he would not have mentioned only these." That's the kind of detachment you're training for. The ability to see an insult, a dismissal, or a manipulation and remain still. Not because you're too weak to fight back, but because you're too strong to need the battle. You walk through a quiet street in your mind, like the paved roads of ancient Rome after dusk. The shops are shuttered, the soldiers off duty, torches burn low. It's peaceful. But that doesn't mean it's weak. Stoics didn't fear the dark. They embraced it. They used it to reflect, to prepare. That's what you're doing now. Preparing. Not to argue, but to endure. You don't rush to reply because you know replies aren't owed. They're chosen. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayals that would hollow most men. Senators plotted behind his back. Friends bartered secrets for favors. Yet he wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been." It's not denial. It's power reclaimed. Because when you say, "They damaged me," you hand them your strength. But when you say, "I survived and learned," you take it back. Here's a modern trap that catches people every day, the fantasy of closure. The belief that if you just said one more thing or heard one more apology, everything inside would calm. But it rarely works that way. More often, it just stirs the pot. That person who ghosted you, they don't come back to heal you. They come back to see if they still own space in your mind. Silence is how you lock the door. Some philosophers challenge this idea. They say closure is a psychological need, that humans are wired to seek emotional resolution. Maybe so. But Stoicism offers a different kind of resolution, inner alignment. Not answers from others, but order within yourself. You stop chasing why and start living how. How will you respond? How will you carry yourself? How will you preserve your dignity? You feel your phone buzz again. A second message shorter than the first. A question mark. A prod. That's when you smile, not bitterly, but knowingly. Because now it's clear. They're not reaching out from remorse. They're testing the waters. They want to see if you're still the person who once bent over backwards to make things right. But you're not. Not anymore. You've done the work, sat with the discomfort, faced the reflection in the mirror that asked hard questions. Why did I tolerate it? What was I afraid to lose? What part of me thought their approval defined my worth? And now your silence isn't avoidance. It's a boundary. The kind Marcus would set. The kind Seneca would respect. The kind you've earned. So you put your phone down, not with frustration, but with peace. Because when they text after silence, the response that shakes them most is no response at all. And even if one day you choose to speak, it won't be from a place of needing to be heard. It'll be from a place of having already heard yourself. That's the power they never expected you to find. And that's why you don't give it away. You think about replying. You almost do. Just a word. Maybe two. But something holds you back, not fear, not pride, something deeper. It's awareness. It's presence. You see clearly now that not all texts require a response, and not all responses serve your higher self. This is where most people crack. They believe that silence must be filled, that an empty space in conversation is a sign of weakness. But you've been learning something the ancients knew well, the power of withholding. You are no longer addicted to filling silence. You're learning to breathe in it, to own it. Marcus Aurelius, sitting in his cold military tent in the forests of Germania, knew this truth intimately. Surrounded by the chaos of war, he still took time each evening to write. Not to the Senate, not to his generals, but to himself. In meditations, he penned, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Nowhere, no text, no message, no apology. Just soul." And here you are checking your phone again, not to see if they responded, but to witness your own growth. The pull is still there, the echo of the old you. But that version would have typed something passive. No worries. All good. Maybe even I miss you too. But you're not that version anymore. Now you understand something else. Forgiveness doesn't require reconnection. And silence doesn't equal resentment. It's neutrality. And neutrality, when rooted in strength, is terrifying to people who once manipulated your emotions like strings on a puppet. Seneca wrote, "He who does not expect is not disappointed." What did he mean by that? He meant that disappointment is born from assumptions, from imagined futures. You thought they'd change. You assumed they'd see your worth. But now you know it's not your job to convince them. It never was. There's a strange kind of reversal happening now. The person who ghosted you suddenly wants to talk. The one who left you confused now wants to clarify. But clarity doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it comes from seeing who they became when they no longer needed something from you. And that's what they didn't expect. Your silence would be louder than any argument. Philosophers debate whether emotional detachment is healthy. Isn't it just coldness, some ask? But Stoicism never teaches coldness. It teaches clarity. You feel everything, but you aren't ruled by those feelings. You see someone return after hurting you, and instead of reacting with anger or eagerness, you respond with space. This space is sacred. It's where your self-worth lives now, no longer dependent on whether they text back or how long they waited or what excuse they offered. You don't need closure from the person who hurt you. You've already given it to yourself. There's a Roman saying carved into the walls of old villas, quod non vetat lex hoc vetat pudor. What the law does not forbid, honor forbids. You apply this not to legal systems, but to your inner laws, your code. It's not illegal to reply. It's not immoral. But your honor, your discipline tells you when something no longer deserves your voice. Because your voice is expensive now. You don't spend it easily. especially not on those who once showed they could live without it. So you step away again, not with pride, not with pettiness, but with power. Because if they didn't value you in your silence, they never truly saw you in your speech. You wake up to another message. It's longer this time, almost thoughtful. There's an apology buried inside, half-hearted but present. Hey, I know it's been a while. I was going through some things. Didn't mean to hurt you. Hope you're well. The younger version of you would have been ecstatic. The craving for recognition used to be so strong. Even breadcrumbs of attention felt like a feast. But not today. Not anymore. Something's different now. And it isn't indifference, it's elevation. You've climbed above the terrain where their words once had power over you. You reread it not with yearning, but with curiosity. You notice the timing, the vagueness, the passive tone. You realize that people often return not when they've changed, but when they sense you have. And you have. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." The message isn't the disturbance, it's your former attachment to it. But you've revised your opinions. You no longer interpret delay as depth. You no longer confuse silence for sincerity. You've learned to trust your own readings of human nature, not just your hopes. You scroll back through your past conversations. You notice a pattern. High highs, low lows. Long silences, short apologies. Promises made in fragile moments and broken just as easily. You remember how often you adjusted your boundaries just to keep them close. You thought that was love. But it wasn't, it was survival. The Stoics saw this clearly. They believed that love without virtue is merely dependency dressed up in romance. True affection must pass the test of logos, reason. If a person's presence disrupts your peace more than their absence does, the Stoics would ask, is this connection aligned with nature? Seneca warned, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Not just kinder, not just more loved, better, sharper, calmer, more truthful. And who made you better, the person who ghosted you, or the solitude that taught you boundaries? A philosophical question follows you now. If someone apologizes only because they fear losing access to you, is that really growth or just regret disguised as humility? You don't hate them. You don't even resent them. You simply see them now without filters, and this clarity is the byproduct of silence. Silence gave you the space to untangle the emotional knots they left behind. And when people realize they can no longer trigger you, they panic. That's when the texts come. But you no longer reply to panic, because you are not a comfort station for chaotic souls. You are not a warm blanket for cold-hearted intentions. You are a whole being, and wholeness does not crave half-heartedness. You turn the phone over, let it rest face down. You walk outside. The world hasn't changed, but you have. The wind touches your face, and for the first time in weeks, you feel weightless. Not because someone came back, but because you don't need them to stay. And here's a Stoic twist. Maybe you still care. Maybe you still wish them well. But wishing someone peace doesn't require you to sit beside them again. It's enough to nod inwardly, say nothing, and continue walking toward a life built on clarity, not craving. You've reclaimed something sacred. Not revenge, not victory, just your center. And from that place, you can see everything clearly, without anger, without need, without illusion. You sit quietly, but your silence is no longer heavy. It's a shield now. Not a wall, not avoidance, but a decision. A cultivated form of inner discipline. The kind of silence that doesn't punish others, but protects you. The kind of silence Marcus Aurelius embraced when he chose to listen to his soul, rather than shout into the noise of politics, betrayal, or criticism. You see, there is an old Roman belief: the more power you have, the less you need to prove. Silence is not a void, it's a vessel. A container for all the strength you no longer waste on explanation, justification, or reaction. The message still sits on your phone unanswered. This is not about revenge. Stoicism never celebrates ego. It's about mastery. He who angers you conquers you, said Epictetus. And it's true, every word they pull out of you drags a piece of your peace with it. But by holding your voice, you reclaim your authority. You are no longer available for chaos. There's a philosophical riddle here. If a person offends you, but you don't respond, did they win, or did you? Scholars still argue this. Some say justice requires reply. Others, like the Stoics, say reply invites more entanglement, and the Stoics chose clarity over clutter. You walk past the mirror. The reflection doesn't look wounded anymore. It looks focused. Tired, maybe, but anchored. This is what Seneca meant when he wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." They gave you the opportunity to prove yourself, not to them, but to yourself. And you did. You didn't lash out. You didn't spiral. You didn't abandon your standards just to be seen. Instead, you stood still. You endured the discomfort. You passed through the emotional storm and remained dry. Now, what do you say? Perhaps you don't say anything. That's the part that confuses them. In a world trained to react, your silence feels like thunder. They expect a flare-up, a "how dare you," a cry, a question, an opening. But you offer none. You've rewritten the rules. They don't get access to you simply because they remembered you. You've realized that absence is information, that silence can be a strategy, that the person who ghosts and returns doesn't need your warmth, they need your reaction. And the minute you reply, you return to the role they cast you in. But you've left that stage. Let them perform alone. You're walking a different path now, a Stoic path, where dignity speaks louder than defense, where presence is offered, not demanded, where the strongest reply is sometimes no reply. And in that silence, you find yourself. There's something deeply Roman about this. A soldier returning from battle, choosing to tend his olive trees instead of bragging in the forum. The battle is over. The lesson is planted. You tend to your life now. Water it, quietly, firmly, without needing to be loud about what you've survived. That is power. You return to yourself. Not because someone begged for your forgiveness, not because they earned their way back, but because you made the quiet decision to stop needing anything from them at all. That's the power silence gives you. It's not emptiness. It's closure without the chaos. It's choosing to rebuild yourself on your own terms. Epictetus warned, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That's hard to accept at first, because you want to believe they did this to you, that they created the ache, the rage, the uncertainty. But slowly you realize they only sparked it. You kept it burning. Every replayed memory, every drafted message you never sent, every time you imagined what you would say if they came back, that was you. And now you extinguish it. Silence becomes sacred. You don't just stop responding to them. You stop responding to your lower self, the one that wants revenge, the one that still aches to be understood. You no longer beg to be heard, because you've finally started listening to yourself. There's a beauty in this return. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself in his journal, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If you stay in resentment, you darken. If you stay in longing, you wither. But if you stay still, you regain shape. Some people confuse silence with weakness. They see it as defeat. But that's because they've never tried to hold their tongue when their ego screams. They've never stood in the fire of their own emotions and refused to flinch. You have. You're doing it now. You've learned that you don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't owe them a seat in your peace. Just because they returned doesn't mean they belong. You don't heal by reopening old doors. You heal by fortifying your own house and locking what needs to stay locked. So you say nothing, and they read everything into it. That's what happens when silence is intentional. It speaks in volumes that words could never reach. It forces the other person to face their own behavior without distraction, without your comfort, without your cues. They sit with themselves, and that's far more punishing than anything you could have written. There's a debate among modern philosophers about whether dignity is best maintained by communication or distance. Some argue closure requires dialogue. Others say closure is something you grant yourself. The Stoics sided with the latter. Their silence wasn't passive, it was principled. And now yours is too. You look at the message again, not out of curiosity, but out of finality. You let the moment pass. You don't type, you don't react. You simply breathe. In Roman times, generals returned from war with fanfare. But Stoic generals like Marcus returned quietly. He wrote his reflections in solitude, not speeches for the crowd. He sought truth, not applause. And now so do you. Because this moment, this choice, isn't about them. It's about reclaiming your authority. And in that silence you rise. You're no longer confused by your silence. You understand its purpose. It's not about hurting them. It's about healing you. You've reached the final layer, not silence toward them, but silence within. That restless noise of insecurity, the voice that used to ask, "But what if they change? What if they didn't mean it? What if I made a mistake?" That voice is quiet now. You've outgrown it. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." But he didn't mean the bravery of swords and shields. He meant the courage to stand still while the storm passes. The bravery to let go when your heart still lingers. The freedom to say nothing and trust that your dignity will say enough. You didn't become cold. You became clear. That's what people misunderstand about the Stoic path. It's not about building walls. It's about learning what's worth letting in. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to invite them back. Because love without boundaries is not noble, it's self-erasure. You've seen it too many times. The cycle of return, regret, repeat. They come back because they want to feel better, not because they want to be better. And your silence disrupts that pattern. You've stopped rewarding inconsistency with access. That's growth. In the quiet hours, you revisit old wounds, not to reopen them, but to trace how far you've come. You're not seeking revenge. You're not hoping they suffer. You're simply living in a way that honors your worth, without applause, without their approval. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury, not to mirror their chaos, not to return their cruelty, but to become unshakable." There's a conversation among Stoic thinkers, one that spans from Zeno to modern-day authors, about whether the highest virtue is justice or self-control. Justice demands action, but self-control demands restraint. You're beginning to see they're not separate. When you protect your peace, you uphold justice for yourself. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to remain silent, not in shame, not in fear, but in sovereignty. And yes, they may come back again. Maybe not with words, maybe through nostalgia, or pity, or desperation disguised as kindness. but you're not the same anymore. You won't be baited by sweetness. You won't mistake regret for change. You've learned that apologies are easy, but altered behavior is rare. So you wait, not for them, but for your next breath. You spend your energy wisely now, on your craft, your health, your peace, not on proving points to people who forfeited the right to your presence. Silence didn't make you cold, it made you composed, and they can't touch that anymore.